Good morning and welcome to the webinar, Suspension of the Tax on Circulation of Goods and Services, the so-called ICMS tax on imports, implications for companies, cash flow and tax reform. Hosted by the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. I am John Welch, Executive Director, and on behalf of the Chamber, we wish you all health and safety at this difficult time. Many corporations that import goods through São Paulo and resell them in interstate transactions in Brazil accumulate large ICMS credits, the tax on circulation of goods and services. As the import tax rate is 18%, while on sales for other states, it's only 4%. In this webinar, we will analyze the possibility of filing a special tax regime to mitigate such accumulation, as well as the possible implications for the general tax reform that is now in Congress. Our moderator today is Felipe Rufalco Medaglia, senior lawyer at Madrona Advogados, who graduated in law from the Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie. He has a postgraduate degree in tax law from the Fundação Getúlio Vargas and a master's in international tax law from the University of Florida in the USA. The full bios of our speakers are available on our website and in the link that you received yesterday for the reminder of the webinar. Before giving the screen to Felipe, I ask that everyone please use the question and answers tab, the Q&A button, to ask questions. You can do them at any time, and the panelists would try to respond after the discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Felipe?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, John, for the kind introduction. I hope everybody is well and safe during these difficult times. And I would like to welcome you all to another important event held by the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. This time to discuss, as John mentioned, the possibility of suspending the ICMS on imports of goods by taxpayers in São Paulo, as well as possible regimes to use an excessive amount of credits that the taxpayer may have. I would like to start by thanking the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce and its representatives, especially Mr. John Walsh, for the opportunity to bring this important topic to discussion and to entrust me with the role to moderate this event. I would also like to thank our invited speakers, Harone, Prates, Vilas, Bôas, Orlando Dalcin, and Rubens, Branco da Silva, who will certainly bring important aspects about the hypothesis of suspension of ICMS on imports, the usage of accumulated tax credits, as well as comments on potential effects of the tax reform. And in particular, I would like to thank everybody who has joined us this morning. As John mentioned, if during the presentation you have any questions, submit them to us in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer them by the end of the event. The idea is for each speaker to make a short presentation, somewhere between 10 or 15 minutes, and then we will start the debates with the questions. As many know, the ICMS basically lives on two different operations: on sale of goods carried out at national level, as well on imports of goods by Brazilian taxpayers. Given that ICMS is a non-cumulative tax credit, there are several cases in which certain taxpayers accumulate excessive amounts of credits. This effect of accumulating credits, which can be seen in several different operations, became more evident after a change in the ICMS rules in respect to interstate transactions with foreign goods. This scenario is further aggravated in the context of the so-called fiscal war, a phenomenon in which certain states give their taxpayers undue benefits in disagreement with the law and the federal constitution, with the sole purpose of attracting their business to that state, even if they're not actually physically on that state. And here's worth clarifying why we decided to focus on the measures taken by the São Paulo state. The answer is quite simple, actually. The measures adopted by São Paulo are the most important because São Paulo is actually responsible for 1/3 of any imports made by Brazilian taxpayers. So this is basically 1/3 of all imports are made by São Paulo, so we need to take a closer look at this. In any way, we also have, by the end of the presentation, some comments on the Rio de Janeiro legislation made by Rubens. Our first speaker will better put the team in discussion, and will present the mechanism through which the São Paulo state is tackling these two harmful effects. That is, the excessive accumulation of ICMS credits on imports and the loss of taxpayers as a result of the fiscal war. Our speaker is Harone Prates Vilas Bôas, who is a lawyer and a coordinator of the indirect tax team of Madrona Advogados. Harone holds a law degree from Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, a post-graduation degree in tax law from PUC São Paulo, and a degree in accounting from the Universidade of São Paulo. Harone, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. John, Felipe, Rubens, Orlando, and all of you that are watching us today. On behalf of Madrona Advogados, I would like to thank Brazil Chan and Mr. John for the opportunity given to us today. And the subject of our presentation, as Felipe said, is the accumulation of ICMS credits by legal entities in Brazil that import goods through the state of São Paulo and resell them to other states in Brazil, mainly but not exclusively by e-commerce operations. The accumulation occurs because imports are made in general as a standard at the ICMS rate of 18%, while interstate resales have a rate of 4%. Before we go into the subject, let us bring some general consideration that will help us to understand the theme. Let me share with you a presentation here. Please let me know if it's possible for you to see. Is it okay for you?
We're already seeing your presentation.
Okay, good.
That's good.
So we'll bring some preliminary considerations about the imports in Brazil. As you know, in federal level in Brazil, we have import tax, tax on manufactured products, IPI, contribution to the Social Integration Program, PIS, and Social Security Financing Contribution. At last, we have in the state level the ICMS, that is state value added tax in Brazil. The ICMS is a tax subject to a debt and credit regime in Brazil. That means that the amount that the taxpayer pays in the previous step is considered as a credit in the subsequent transaction. Let's see an example of that. So let's consider 3 legal entities in Brazil: legal entity number 1, number 2, and number 3. And that the legal entity number 1 sell a product to the legal entity number 2, in which there is an ICMS tax burden of $20. Later, when the legal entity number 2 resale that product, that good, for the legal entity number 3, there is a tax burden of ICMS of $50. The legal entity number 2 won't pay $50 for the state of São Paulo. It will pay $50 for its own operation related to the resale here, less $20 related to the previous operation. So the amount that will need to be paid by legal entity number 2 is only $30. Going ahead, we have now what's the current situation in Brazil that is related to our topic. So when a legal entity in the state of São Paulo imports a product, it pays, as a rule, 18% of tax rate, okay? And when it resale in interstate operation to other, to other Brazilian states, the rate is only 4%. So this difference between the tax burden related to the import and the tax burden related to the interstate operation, even if we consider that this interstate operation, the legal entity practice a price higher than that one in the previous step, there is a big difference here, okay, between 18 and 4%. So this difference has as consequence high and continuous amount of ICMS credit. And sometimes the legal entities in the state of São Paulo don't have what to do with that amount. So what is a possible solution that we are suggesting here? The state of São Paulo allows the taxpayers to ask for a special regime in which the taxpayer won't pay in the import the total or at least the partial amount of ICMS that levies on the import. So there won't be anymore this difference, okay, this ICMS credit accumulation at here. So it's a very simple tax regime. If it's presented by the taxpayer and all the documents are correct, we believe that it will last from 3 to 5 months to have the approval in the state of São Paulo. So at last, we listed here some requirements for the special regime to be approved. At first, the taxpayer must be an electronic invoice issuer in the state of São Paulo, must prove that he has high and continuous ICMS credit resulting from the operation that we mentioned previously, and that is not possible to mitigate that accumulation with the amount with other transactions in the state of São Paulo. Furthermore, it has to promote the custom clearance of the product import in the state of São Paulo, and at last and most important, must be in good standing with the tax authorities. So as Felipe said in the beginning, just brief related to the theme, and we at your disposal to questions at the end of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation, Harone. It is clear that a special regime not only can effectively generate a very positive effect in the corporation's cash flow, since it will reduce the payments of ICMS on imports, but also would restrain the constant increase in credits held by companies in São Paulo, as well aims to avoid, or at least encourage, the taxpayer to change its domicile to another state as a result of the fiscal war. In other words, this special regime can avoid future problems arising from this constant accumulation of credits, but it does not completely solve the past, since before the concession, the taxpayers have already accumulated a relevant credit balance. Not only that, demonstrating that you have this relevant credit balance is a requirement to get this special regime, as you mentioned. And this gives us the perfect link to Orlando Dalcin's presentation, since he will tell us about the mechanisms that the state of São Paulo grants to its taxpayers to take advantage and to use these accumulated credits generated in the past. Orlando is a director of indirect taxes at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He also holds a law degree in Universidade Presbiteriana Mackenzie, has a postgraduate degree in tax law at University of São Paulo, several courses taken in the New York University, and he's a professor at the Municipal University of São Caetano do Sul. Go ahead, Orlando.
Thank you for the introduction, Felipe. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Before starting jumping the subject, I'd like to thank you in my name and on behalf of PwC Brazil to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce and everyone that was involved on organizing and put together this event and the opportunity to be here with you all today, especially Mr. John Welsh. I also would like to thank fellow colleagues that are here with me this morning, especially Felipe, Harone, and Rubens. And I'm very glad to discuss once again with this audience such a relevant issue as the ICMS credit balance, tax reform, and how to deal with this kind of topic. So if I may, I will share my screen because I put together a short presentation to guide the discussion. So I hope you are already seeing.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. So I will leverage on Felipe's and comments and Harone's presentation because they already covered several bases regarding this issue and the special regime in particular. And I will focus a bit more on the credit balance itself and how the state of São Paulo allows taxpayers to deal with this kind of situation. So just a brief recap. One of the things that I always like to stress is that credit balance is not necessarily something good. As regard taxes in Brazil, usually it isn't. Is it something that is likely to be harmful? To be more specific, this is one of possibly the topic that I face more times with my clients because this usually companies take some time to notice the size of it and how to find the solutions. So this is something very usual, and in a moment of economic setback or crisis, is important to be as efficient as possible. So what are the issues with the credit balance? And the first one is the cash flow adverse impact. So different from other jurisdictions, especially European ones, in which a credit balance of VAT, and here we're talking about ICMS, so it is sort of VAT, as Harone explained. It's a state tax, but it's not an actual VAT, it's similar to it. And different from other jurisdictions, in Brazil, the mere fact of a credit balance, or that's it, the accrual of more credit in the inflow of goods than debits on the outflow of goods, does not allow the taxpayer by in itself to request a cash refund. So other jurisdictions, if we're talking about VAT, it's natural that if you have more credit than debit, tax authorities will refund you this amount. In Brazil, this does not work like that. So credit balance, as a general rule, will become an asset on the accounting statements on the balance sheet of companies. So in terms of cash flow, this is not good because it was a portion of the price you paid for, or the companies paid for goods and the VAT, and now they do not have the actual amount because it will only be an asset to be registered. And even though companies should register these credit balances as assets, they will not be able to do any kind of update or interest during the course of time. So there are companies that accrue credit balance for years and years, and this amount gets devaluated by year because there's no kind of update or interest on credit balances of ICMS. And here is the thing that is the main problem to companies when dealing with credit balance, which is the risk of impairment of the amount. So if a company has a recurrent credit balance of ICMS and lacks a perspective of a realization of this amount, this may require impairment, and these have immediate impact on the result of the company. So the necessity or not of impairment could be something quite important to companies, and the criteria that usually companies and auditors use to determine whether credit balance impairment is required or not is the possibilities of realization of recovering that credit, and this is where we have plans or possibilities to act as the one that Harone explored in more detail, the special regime for the suspension of the ICMS, among others, which I will comment a bit on the following slides. So, who are companies that usually accrue credit balance in São Paulo, in the state of São Paulo? So there are several hypotheses. The first and probably more usual of those is the one that it's due to a change on the ICMS upon importations, which Felipe commented as well prior to this presentation. Because of the tax incentives, the tax war among states, there were a lot of incentives that aim only to bring importation through the territory of some states. That's why the interstate rate for imported goods was reduced, and thus, if an importation rate is not reduced accordingly, a credit balance will be generated within the state of such importation. And this is very critical because in this scenario, we're talking about companies that will have or may have credit balance in one state and payable in another state, because just by means of example, but if a company imports something through the state of São Paulo and collects upon importation an 18% rate, and then decides to transfer to its distribution center in the state of Minas Gerais, it will be subject to a 4% rate. So now this illustrative company have a credit of 14 in the state of São Paulo and a payable of 4 in the state of Minas Gerais. So this is quite critical and unfortunately quite usual. Other companies that also have credit balance recurrent issues are exporters, because since 1996, exportations are not taxed in Brazil. So the companies that import, they are entitled of maintaining their credits from purchasing, but they have no debits based on their sales. So this, if a company is focused on exportations, is likely that they will have it will have credit balance of ICMS. Agribusiness companies as well usually have credit balance, especially because of specific tax incentives as presumed credits. It's kind of spare credits or tax basis reductions, and anything that could generate more credit than debit of ICMS. the automotive sector in general, include especially automakers, but also the whole supply chain. So auto parts as well have usually problems of ICMS credit balances. And finally, any kind of product that allows the ICMS tax basis reduction or exemption, provided that their credits are maintained. So there are some sectors or some companies that have this kind of transaction, and those companies will or are likely to have credit balance of ICMS, and this is where the issue is risen. So how to deal with and mitigate credit balances, and this is a very or quite recurrent topic. First solution is for the first problem is the one that Harone detailed on his presentation regarding the Ordinance CACH 108, the Portaria CACH, which allows the suspension of the ICMS upon importation. State of São Paulo, this is the legislation applicable to the state of São Paulo. Other states have similar tools to deal with the situation. A couple of things are worth mentioning about on that. It is subject to state discretion, so it's not a right of the taxpayer. It should be requested and approved. In years of crisis as 2020, in my experience, I noticed that many pleas are not neither approval nor denied, so they are stalled, and this is something that encourages taxpayers to file the requests in the beginning of the year in order to have a new the state have a new budget, and thus can be more proactive on approval requests. And they are also subject to a subjective analysis. So that's something very important to the taxpayer to be aware. So the idea of this special regime is to stop the accrual of credit due to this reduced rate of 4%. And so depending on the operation, this could reduce the credit balance, but not necessarily end or finished. So it's the terms of the request are important to sustain the percentage that the company intends to have of suspension in order to be the most effective possible. So it's important to always be very specific on the criteria that you are using in order to justify an X or a Y amount of suspension upon importation, the ICMS upon importation. The second one, it's on the ICMS regulations, is based on Article 327J. Basically, there is a provision in which the state of São Paulo, knowing that some sectors have chronicle issues of credit balances, they allow the request of special regimes to suspend the ICMS on their acquisitions within the state of São Paulo, or even the difference between rates on interstate rates, or also upon importation. So the idea is to try to preserve some sectors that are chronically ill by the credit balance issues. So the examples that we have here are the auto parts, because the state of São Paulo have a important automotive industry here. So, and the automotive industry have usually its suppliers nearby. So there's a lot of automakers in the state of São Paulo, and they all have this kind of, many of them have this kind of issue. And cosmetics and perfumes as well have the possibility of pleading this kind of incentive. They are highly taxed items, but also they have this additional burden of usually having credit balances. There is also a general stipulation on Ordinance CACH 43 which allows more broader requests. But now, state of São Paulo in the past month, so this is something that changed a bit between the first presentation that we did in October and now, is that the state of São Paulo enacted a law that will oblige the creation or enaction of laws in not only decreased by the governor, but laws through the state assembly to grant any kind of new tax incentive. So this is something that so far in my interaction with tax authorities is something that will be always taken into consideration and always be analyzed whether it's possible to be granted or not without a new law. So that's why this need to be properly addressed. Just, oh, sorry, a message just came. Okay, it's from Mr. John, sorry. And we also have in state of São Paulo the ECREDAC, which is an electronic tool to request the change of the credit balance of ICMS into accumulated credit. And we will go through the impacts of such change in a minute. Also, there is the Ordinance Cat 42, which is a specific tool to recover the ICMS on the substitution regime or the withheld ICMS. So this is also something that the state of São Paulo uses to grant reimbursement of tax credits, but this is another, that's not specifically what we're talking about. And one of the most efficient ways to deal with credit balances are corporate restructuring and business or changes on the supply chain. So changing the place of the supply of several inputs, or the income term of the acquisition, or the terms of the transportation or the warehousing. This kind of commercial changes could have significant impacts on ICMS credit balances. So companies that struggle with this kind of issue should also take that into account. About the ECREDAC, and now moving towards the end of the presentation. The ECREDAC is the electronic tool that allows this change from the credit balance of ICMS into the accumulated credit of ICMS. So there is two types of ECREDAC, the simplified and the cost. Basically, the difference is the threshold of value that could be requested and the complexity. Cost is quite more burdensome in terms of complexity, on IT complexity especially, but we're not talking about accounting cost, is the cost of ICMS that is eligible to be converted from credit balance into ICMS accumulated credit. And why companies would like to do that? Why a company would like to change its credit balance into accumulated credit? So as I mentioned before, credit balance in Brazil cannot be used or just be requested to a cash refund differently from other jurisdictions. But if a company have accumulated credit, so if it goes through the ECREDAC process and change its credit balance into accumulated credit, it's possible to transfer such ICMS accumulated credit to third parties, either parties that have parent companies or not. Could be used to purchase fixed assets within the state of São Paulo. So if a company have credit balance or accumulated credit and wants to buy machinery or vehicles within the state of São Paulo, accumulated credit could be used. Could be also used to pay tax assessments of ICMS. And there are other possibilities. So it is a very sound way to use this asset that otherwise will be only as a credit balance and could be only used to offset ICMS payable. So if a credit balance is not converted into accumulated credit, the only way that the company can use is to pay other ICMS debits, future ICMS debits. If it is accumulated credit, there are a bunch of possibilities to be explored. So it is an efficient way to realize the ICMS credit balance. Issues are, it is complex and it is also time-taking to be approved, because it's even more time-taking than a special regime because it is more complex. So depending on several aspects, could take a good amount of time. So on a nutshell, and this is the last slide, the CREDAC, it's complex because it goes through several steps. So we have to transmit, to prepare the files of this request, the preparation take into account the whole historic of how this credit balance was formed, because not all credit balance could be converted into accumulated credit, but only if we're talking about specific transactions such as exportations, tax-basis reduction, exemptions. So if the credit balance is due to stocks, so for instance, if companies have purchased a lot of stocks and thus have a lot of ICMS credit due to such stocks, but is not able to sell and have the ICMS debit, this kind of credit balance is not eligible for a CREDAC. So it has some analysis to be made on the credit balance in order to verify whether this credit balance could or could not be converted into accumulated credit. Then you have to do the request of appropriation. This is before the actual filing of the request. There is a specific request of the inspection, specific inspection upon the request. So usually this takes at least 1 year, and in some cases we have experienced even 3 years of inspection before approving an CREDAC. So it is time taking, but for many companies, the alternative is just to have the asset and possibly having to deal with an impairment. So it is the lesser of two evils, if I may. I mean, it's not the best of the worlds, but it's better than having this asset that is not recoverable on the balance sheet. So just to summarize, credit balances of ICMS are an issue for many companies, and there are several actions that could be taken towards a solution or at least a mitigation. There is a special regime of CAT 108. There is the special regimes on Article 327J. There is the CREDAC, and there is the possibility of changing location of suppliers, warehouses, the means of hiring warehousing or transportations, the means of the terms of the contractual terms of the freight. Everything that regards the transaction or supply chain could impact the credit balance of ICMS and could be dealt with. So that was the content that I'd like to share with you all at this morning, and it would be a pleasure to comment on any kind of questions or remarks that anyone have. And once again, I'd like to thank the opportunity by the Brazilian American Chamber and to all the colleagues that are with me on this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Orlando. This was a very clear presentation from you. I know firsthand that it's very hard to talk about a subject that is full of details like this, but you did it easily, so congratulations on your presentation. just bringing a small link between Harone and Orlando's presentations. Harone told us about how imports followed by interstate transactions can create a very high credit balance. He also told us about a measure that the state of São Paulo allows its taxpayers to mitigate this continuing increasing of credit balance due to imports. And then Orlando told us about how the state of São Paulo, with all its problems, allow the taxpayers to use this excessive credit balance in its operation and all the hardships that follows to the process of getting it become accumulated tax credit. I do want to hear Rubens' presentation about this, but I also wanted to point out one thing that Orlando mentioned, an example, which was imports from São Paulo, where you have excessive credits, followed by a transfer to Minas Gerais, where you don't have credits and you later on sell it and you have to pay ICMS in Minas, even though you have credit in São Paulo. So this also gives us a very good segue for Rubens' presentation, because not only Rubens will speak to us about the measures that are usually taken by the state of Rio to solve the same problems that we're discussing here, but he also will tell us a little bit about the discussions that are being held in the National Congress at this point, and it's a very hot topic in the National Congress right now, about the Brazilian tax reform. So presenting Dr. Rubens, he has a law degree from Faculdade Nacional de Direito. He also has an accounting degree from Faculdade Moraes Juniors. He was the president of Uncham between 1999 and 2000. He had important positions in the Regional Accounting Council of Rio de Janeiro, the Commercial Board of Rio de Janeiro. And I mean, he had a very extensive curriculum that I will ask Rubens not to read in full because I don't want to take none of your time. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Felipe. First of all, thank you very much, John Welch and the Brazilian American Chamber for the opportunity of participating in this elite group of professionals. I'm very honored to be invited to participate. And the topics that I'm going to cover is regarding what happens in the state of Rio de Janeiro regarding companies that have accumulated tax credits, ICMS tax credits. Well, most of the Brazilian states, they have provided for, in its state legislation, a possibility of the taxpayer using the accumulated tax credit that they may generate in their operations. However, only the state of São Paulo, because it's the most industrialized state in Brazil, they have developed a much better automatic type of legislation in which the taxpayer, once they fulfill the requirements, they would be able to use their excessive credits and reduce at the same time the payment of ICMS for other operations or for imports. The state of Rio de Janeiro, they have a provision that the request for utilization of the excess tax credit can be made by the taxpayer, but normally it all depends on the approval by the Secretary of Finance of the state. So it's not an automatic mechanism as São Paulo has developed. In the state of Rio de Janeiro, you normally every year in the month of March or April, the state opens a window of opportunity in which companies that have excess credits may apply for before the state authorities whether they could transfer those credits to suppliers or to make payments, etc. But at the end, it will depend on the final approval of the Secretary of State. And because of the fact that the state of Rio de Janeiro in the past 10 years has been suffering for shortage of cash, the possibility of having your request being approved by the tax authorities is very rare. You may end up having an approval, but it's not it's not easy. It's very difficult, as it depends on the subjective agreement of one person, which is the Secretary of State of Finance. So São Paulo, again, has a mechanism that is much easier for the taxpayer to apply for the utilization of credit, and has the mechanisms already established. And once he fulfills all those requirements, he would be able to use them. In Rio de Janeiro, the taxpayer has to be alert every year, the beginning of the year, to see the legislation that is being put in force by the state authorities that allows you for 1 or 2 months to transfer, make credit transfer for payments of goods and so forth. So this is the way it works in the state of Rio de Janeiro. However, I'm gonna comment now on the proposals that we have in Congress to change our tax system, our tax reform that is being in discussion in Congress. Right now, we have 3 proposals, 3 written proposals. One, which is the PEC 45, which is PEC means for constitutional amendment. PEC 110, PEC 45 has been raised by the House of Representatives, and PEC 110, it's been presented by the Senate. And we have a third proposal, which was prepared by the executive branch of the federal government, which is a bill to change or to replace 2 federal taxes on revenues called PIS and COFINS by a new tax called CBS, which is tax on goods and services. This new CBS proposed by the executive branch will have a rate of 12%, when the PIS and COFINS highest rate today goes to 9.25%. So we are already seeing here an increase in the total burden of the PIS and COFINS that will jump from 9.25 to 12%. This new CBS tax, it is intended to work as a federal value-added VAT, in the sense of that full input of tax credit would be available. So we have, again, going back again, 3 proposals in Congress right now. And we have some rumors of other changes, but has not been presented yet. The PEC 45 proposal to replace 5 different 5 taxes, which are IPI, PIS, COFINS, ICMS, and ISS, by one new taxes which would be called IBS. The PEC 110, which is at the Senate level, makes a suggestion of the creation of this IBS tax, but replacing 9 different taxes, which goes from IPI, IOF, PIS, COFINS, ICMS, and ISS, which means that once these are discussed and developed and approved, the ICMS, as we know it today, will be gone. We don't know yet what will be the mechanisms in place because those 2 proposals have not provided for it. What the companies with accumulated ICMS credits would be able to operate in this new IBS tax that will replace the ICMS and the ISS. Just for you to understand how difficult this is, in Brazil, we have 26 states and a federal district and 5,570 Brazilian municipalities that they are allowed by the Constitution to issue taxation or to have its own taxes. So the proposals now in Congress, they have to face how they will harmonize these 26 states, federal district, and these 5,570 municipalities in such a way that this new proposed tax or new tax, IBS, would please all these taxation entities in Brazil that goes up to almost 6,000 different entities. Okay, so we still have other proposals that have not been put into writing yet. It's not in Congress yet, but the likelihood is that that probably will be sent to Congress in the last week of December, which are the creation of the taxation of dividends at the rate of 15%, probably the increase of the highest individual tax rate from 27.5% to 35%, and a proposal for a reduction in the corporate tax rate from 34% to 21%. Those are the proposals, some of them already at the hands of the Congress, some are just in the newspaper gossip that the newspapers are talking about, but the proposal, the effective proposal, have not been presented so far. But anyway, the system that we have today of the ICMS, the handling and the utilization of accumulated tax credits, this, if those legislation are finally approved and harmonized, the way that we know the ICMS today is going to change. We don't know yet because the proposed legislation, again, does not mention how the taxpayer with accumulated ICMS tax credit will handle these new taxes and whether they are going to be able to use their accumulated credits of ICMS against this new IBS tax. So that's a lot of things to be happening from now, which is beginning of December to the end of December. And if I can say something that it's mere speculation from my part, I don't believe that this tax reform will go through approval in this month of December because it's too complex and too little time for having this legislation approved. Because one thing we still have to do is to go from the words that we have in this proposal to the numbers, how the tax revenues is going to work if all these changes are approved. Just for you to have an idea, the PAC 45 have about 5 years, or 5 to 10 years to implement the new taxation and the reduction of old taxes. So the taxes that have been replaced will be replaced over time. So it's going to take a lot of time yet for us to understand how the tax collection, how the tax revenues will be generated in the future in Brazil. This is a brief summary of what's going on in the country. And again, I thank you very much again, John, for helping me, for inviting me to come to this presentation. And I'm available here to answer any question the audience may have. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you, Rubens. It was a very good presentation. Unfortunately, the news are not that good for Rio de Janeiro taxpayers since they depend on the actual act of the Rio government to get something that it should have a law already establishing, such São Paulo does have. Also, I'd want to point out that if anybody has any questions, please submit them into our Q&A section. But I do want to do a follow-up on the tax reform. So, as you mentioned, we have several different, and this follow-up is to anybody that wants to answer it, okay? As Rubens mentioned, we have different proposals for tax reform, a proposal that is very, let's say, very optimistic in stating that, okay, let's unify federal taxes, state taxes, municipal taxes, all in one tax. You have something that is in between. Okay, not all taxes, but the most relevant ones. And you have the government proposal that you only get to PIS and COFINS, which are two federal contributions. So what I want to follow up is, okay, let's say that this tax reform actually goes forward and we do have a unified tax that will also encompass the transactions that are currently taxed by ICMS. So you have one national tax that substitutes ICMS. In this regard, do you believe, and this of course is mere speculation, do you believe that we'll still have situations like accumulating of credit balance, or no, since it's one single tax, we will actually resolve this problem and then we just have to deal with the past, with the high accumulated credits that we already have? So I don't know if anyone want to jump into this.
Well, if I may add a comment on that, the proposals provides for that this new countrywide tax will be like, or should work as the European VAT tax, in which a full credit of the previous operation will be utilized from there on. So what the taxpayers will have to worry about is that what they're going to do with the past. What happens with the accumulated ICMS credits of the past once this new tax becomes implemented or becomes approved in the Congress? I don't know if anyone would like to.
So if I may jump in as well, I totally agree with you, Rubens. And I do think that in terms of design, the proposals, they are good, they are solid, they are structured. But the thing is, we have a scenario that is given, which is we have at least, for instance, we have at least 40 years of tax war among states in Brazil. We have companies with credit balances within the billions of reais. So even though in terms of design, it is spectacular, it's really good, it's really efficient. In terms of implementing, I still am a little concerned, or at least not even skeptical, but almost, because it's too good to be true. I mean, if we were starting a tax model right now, it would be a great model, either the IBS or the CBS. But what I see as an advantage from the CBS is just that I think that in Brazil we have many issues in the tax system as a whole, but I think that some are chronicle. One is the uncertainty. So we do have several topics in which the Supreme Federal Court had to jump in and clarify the understanding of the tax basis, or what can or cannot grant credit to taxpayers. We do have some relevant trials that started and are not settled yet, and also involving billions and billions of Brazilian reais. So there is the uncertainty. There is the an environment that is quite bellicose. So we have many controversy. So Brazil have the largest court in the South Hemisphere of the world, and the one that is the most litigating party in Brazil is the Federal Union, and mainly because of tax issues. So we do have a system that is very based on the litigation, and very based on controversy, and especially because of this uncertainty that I just mentioned. And the complexity and the electronic environment as a whole are also problems. I think that those propositions, they deal with this portion of at least many aspects of the uncertainty. So they are not perfect. They have some things to be addressed. But if, for instance, at least CBS goes forward, we will resolve the issue of the ICMS on the PIs and COFINS tax basis. We will resolve the issue of what expenses could or could not be considered as credit for PIs and COFINS purposes. So we prevent a new cycle of judicial decisions and uncertainty for the next 10 or 20 years. So I don't think that these are solutions that will resolve everything from starting tomorrow. But I think that they have this strong side that is not always emphasized, and it is relevant because the tax issues in Brazil are not only on the burden side, but also on the complexity, uncertainty, red tape, ancillary obligations. So that's positive aspects that I foresee in these proposals. I hope that at least a portion of them go forward, but I don't know. I mean, in terms of Brazil political environment, everything changes a lot. So it's always it's better to be safe than sorry, right? So I will wait for the next chapters. But I agree with the remarks that both Rubens and Felipe made about the tax reform.
I remember.
I'm sorry. May I make a follow-up question on this to the whole panel, especially Rubens? I first started talking about tax reform, looking at it in Brazil in the early 90s. Really when I first started paying attention to this type of thing. We still haven't had a reform yet, really, what you would call a reform. Will it ever get done? I'm not talking about December. It just seems like a very, very difficult political discussion when you're redefining the tax base for every level of government. Maybe we can be hopeful, but what do you guys think about the actuality of getting a reform done? Doesn't have to be this year.
Well, let me say this, John. I believe on 2007 or 8, I've been to an event. There's a very prestigious tax professor here in Brazil, and he was talking about the tax reform. And at that time, he said, and I remember this quite clear, that he said that that time he was hopeful that we will actually get it. This was 12 years ago, and we haven't had anything, not even close to a tax reform since then. What I do believe it will happen is some sort of simplification of the tax regime, but not the tax reform as we are discussing. I don't believe that we will get rid of 11, 12 taxes in exchange for one tax. But I do believe that some things like PIS and COFINS unification, we will have it. This is a project, by the way, that is being created ever since the Dilma was president. We got her impeached, then came Michel Temer. We were discussing this same unification of PIS and COFINS, and now we have an actual proposal that basically, as Orlando mentioned, solves a lot of issues that have been created by the current legislation of PIS and COFINS. It incorporates several decisions from the Supreme Court, from the Superior Court of Justice, and this kind of tax reform, if I can say, I do expect it to happen. I also expect something that would create a double level taxation. The investor and the company here in Brazil, dividends paid to its shareholders are exempt of taxes. Following the word tendency, this would probably mean that our corporate income tax rates would reduce, and we will have taxation on dividends, which can be something positive or negative. We have to look how it comes. So to answer bluntly, I do believe we'll have something. I don't believe we'll have the complete tax reform. And I'm not talking about this year. I don't believe it for next year. I don't believe it during the Bolsonaro government. I don't believe it in a foreseeable future.
Perhaps that's why they divided it into different parts, but I'd like to hear other comments. It was very good. Thank you.
I think that Felipe raised some great aspects, because that's also true. I mean, this CDS project, it was discussed for at least 3 or 4 years without any kind of actual bill. We had a bill only this year, but everyone knew which were the ground, the bone back of the project, but I also would like to say that maybe in some aspects we do not have an actual reform, and I'm also with Felipe on this one. I do not believe that we will have a whole new system in any foreseeable future, but I do think that we or at least I feel that we made progress in some aspects, and they are not highlighted, because in my point of view, ICMS probably is the tax with the highest level of uncertainty and discussion, because we have 27 states with different legislations and different issues. And if we go back to the year of 2016, we had, when the e-commerce was growing in Brazil, we had a huge amount of uncertainty because of the B2C players that were establishing themselves in Brazil, and states in some regions were charging ICMS without actual legal ground. So we have a big issue of double taxation, and that triggered an action from the Supreme Court on the proposal of a binding decision from Gilmar Mendes, which had and ultimately resulted in a covenant in 2017 that it was a big step, because from that covenant we had, from 2017 to now, we had a route clearly defined to the end of the tax war among the states, which is time-taking. It will go until 2032, but so far the requirements are met were met by the states. We solved this issue about the e-commerce taxation of the ICMS, because now it's clearly settled that a portion will be on the state of the origin, a portion will be to the state of destination. It was negotiated a period of transition and split the difference during this period. And states had to disclosure their tax incentives. So, I mean, still complex and still a troublesome environment. But I think that in some aspects we improved. And the propositions of changing everything, one of the challenge that they raise is that then we have to get back on the steps that were taken in a more isolated or more specific way. So when some state authorities, they go together to improve these ICMS issues, they have expectation of, well, and the companies as well, the taxpayers, they have an expectation of those steps to be followed to the next 10 years or so. And change on that is also something that will be much discussed and debated before any of the projects that involve ICMS goes forward. So that's why I'm also with Felipe and Rubens on the CBS front. I think that's more feasible. It's possible to happen. The IBS, I think, is too broad, and even though could be argued that it is a more efficient or fair or simpler tax, I don't think that it's necessarily implementable. So that's why I always try to highlight the improvements that were made in the system in the past years, not only the flaws.
Yes, and Orlando, I would add for your comments the fact that even if we have an approval of a huge tax reform, the proposals that are in progress, they bring, as a rule, general considerations. So we'll have to have new regulations about these general considerations, and these new regulations could bring for us new problems. So maybe in 5 or 10 years, we will have the same discussions that you are having right now.
One thing is a little while ago, I'm sorry, Rubens, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say that I think that the first discussion will be probably about the past. What happened with the stock of credits that you have once the systems turn? Do you get to take them to the new system, to the new tax, or is there a period for you to do it and then we will lose it? So this will probably start litigation on day one.
I was going to say, it seems like an eternity ago, we had the Treasury secretaries from 5 states on, and they, all of them, now it's, especially Goiás, because Schmidt, were quite, the most optimistic I've seen sort of governors or economic, Treasury secretaries from states in terms of moving ahead. So that was one encouraged, and I still hear the same thing from them. So that's something.
Yeah, the thing is that the states reach an agreement, but it doesn't. It's not an agreement that was made with the federal government. So the federal government had a different proposal than the states. The municipalities also have some disagreements with the proposals we have, and on top of that, you get an environment that is very political, that now we are discussing that the government want to get behind and let the burden of this tax reform go to the House of Representatives rather than itself. So it's true. It's been I don't remember seeing political players being hopeful as this for this tax reform. But I don't think that we are quite there yet.
I agree.
So, and then if you allow me, I will give you all time to make a final remark, but if you can include on this a question that was actually brought up before in this first version of this debate is, well, if we stay like this, the tax war, etc., can we make something so that this tax war be something positive? The states competing against itself can be something that actually benefits the taxpayers, or is just harmful for the system. So if Rubens, you can start on your final remarks, adding these comments, I will be grateful.
Okay, thank you, Felipe. I think that we are here at the crossways. I don't believe that we are going to have a full reform of our tax system. And I remember the prior minister, Dalcin saying that tax reform should be handled by tax lawyers or people who understand taxes. And the people that are handling these now in Congress, they are politicians. They do not understand how a tax system in a country like Brazil works. We have a very complex tax system, and the complexity comes from the fact that we have 27 state legislation, and we have more than almost 6,000 municipalities, taxing entities, and that makes the system very complex. It's very difficult to change that. I mean, with 3 weeks in December of 2020 to solve that. We are going to have, by the end of the year, for sure, will be taxation of dividends, although we still see some movements against that taxation, because when Brazil reduced or eliminate the taxation of dividends, Brazil increased the taxation of the corporations. The only way that you can return is that we're going to put back the tax on dividends, but we have to reduce at the same time, in the same proportion, the taxation of corporation. Otherwise, we chase away new investments in the country, because it will be very expensive to operate in Brazil. So I think that we have to expect by the end of the year some tax increases in terms of dividends, maybe the individual tax rate, maybe the elimination of the deduction of the interest on net equity. That is something that the IRS in Brazil have been trying to eliminate for many years. And no one understands why this still is in place. The reason is because when it was implemented, the basis was, well, we have eliminated the inflation, but we still are going to have some inflation. So the deduction of the interest on net equity is to eliminate the impact of inflation. But now they are saying that we're going to eliminate that without putting anything in place. So it's very difficult right now to understand how the tax system is going to operate if one of these three proposals, maybe the easiest one is the replacement of the PIS and COFINS, as Orlando mentioned, by the CBS, because PIS and COFINS, in fact, we do not need a constitutional amendment to change it. It's just to replace two taxes by another one, as we already have in the past sometimes.
Thanks, Rubens. Orlando, would you like to jump in and with your final remarks?
So my final remark would be another thank for all the opportunity. Thank you for sharing. It was very productive to me. Everything you shared with the audience today. It was a pleasure, and I will always be available to discuss such relevant topics with you. Try to keep optimistic, and I like it very much. This last remark from Rubens that maybe tax reform should be dealt by tax experts, not necessarily just by politicians. So it is a technical issue. So why so politicized, right? And thank you, and I hope everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Orlando. Now, Harone, please, your closing statement.
Okay, thank you, Felipe. So in relation to the tax reform, I understand that up to the end of the year, as Rubens said, that if we have something approved, we will have a tax increase disguised as a tax reform. Furthermore, I would like to thank again Brazil Shen and Mr. John on behalf of Madrona Advogados. And in relation to our topic, we all know that the huge amount of ICMS credits is a problem that a lot of taxpayers face in the state of São Paulo. And the special regime that we previously discussed is a possible solution in order to mitigate that issue. Orlando brought for us more alternatives to solve the problem, and Rubens talked about how things work in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So thank you all again very much, and have a nice week.
Okay, with that closes our event. I would just like to thank Brazilian American Chamber again for making this event happen, and for the invitation to be the mediator here. This invitation was quite an honor for me. I would also like to congratulate Harone, Orlando, Rubens for their presentations. You're all very clear and and provide us with very interesting remarks on each topic covered. So thank you for that. And then last but not least, thank you, John, for being present with us, for helping us going through this, and hopefully we'll see each other soon.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much, Felipe. And thank you, Harone, Orlando, and Rubens, for a lively and excellent discussion. Also, thank you all for attending. The complexity and very high levels of import taxes, as you can see, and the taxes in general in Brazil shows how much Brazil needs tax reform and maybe some trade opening. And this was a perfect segue for our next webinar. It will take place on Tuesday, the 8th of December, on Exploring International Trade, a Look to the Future at 10 a.m. Eastern. Until then, stay healthy and happy, and we hope to see you again at a future webinar. Thank you.